Hello guys, tonight we're going to travel to a quieter, slower world. A world of train whistles in the distance, the rattle of porcelain teacups in Viennese cafes, dusty sunlight falling across maps of distant provinces, and diplomats adjusting their monocles beneath gaslight. It is a world balanced delicately on the edge of change, oblivious to the great tear that fate will slice through it in one warm summer day. Before we begin, I'm always curious to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it by you? Let me know in the comments below. It helps me imagine you more clearly wherever you are. Now, take a deep breath, sink into your pillow, let your blankets wrap around you like the wool coats worn by travellers in old railway compartments. Adjust your body until you feel just right. Let your jaw loosen. Rest your shoulders. Allow yourself to drift gently into this slow, faraway place. We're not in a rush here. We're going to drift into 1914, and here is part 1 of how one day in 1914 destroyed the old world forever. Part 1. The calm before the storm. Vienna, early morning, June 27th, 1914. You wake to the sound of hooves on cobblestone, muffled and rhythmic. A milk cart turns the corner below your shuttered window, creaking under the soft weight of glass bottles. The morning air drifts in with the scent of warm bread from the bakery downstairs, mingling with the faint tang of coal smoke still lingering from the night. The world feels still, not silent, but resting, as if history itself is holding its breath. You sit up in bed in your little pension room in the heart of Vienna. The wallpaper is beginning to peel near the ceiling. Olive and gold stripes, very traditional, slightly faded. On the desk, yesterday's Neue Freie Press lies folded. It says something about the Archduke and his visit to Bosnia, but you didn't read closely. Just another royal engagement, you thought. There's an uneventful comfort to your life. The post arrives every second morning, the baker's boy whistles the same melody when he passes the square, and the same bearded man feeds the pigeons outside the Hofburg Palace. Your work, perhaps you're a junior clerk or maybe an artist's apprentice, is ordinary, and though money is tight, you find peace in your routines. A coffee at Café Grünsteidl, perhaps, where the intellectuals mutter about Hegel and Freud under clouds of cigarette smoke. A slow stroll past the Ringstrasse in the golden light of late afternoon. There's a sense that life will go on like this, always. Ordered, secure, European. The empire is ancient, sprawling. Over 50 million people live beneath the eagle's wings of the Austro-Hungarian realm, from Bohemia's forests to the plains of Hungary, from Dalmatian coasts to the snowy Carpathians. And yet, somehow, they all orbit Vienna. Here, at the centre, power and tradition whisper through the halls of marble ministries and opera houses. But beneath this calm surface, tiny cracks run through the foundations. You can't see them yet, not unless you know where to look. You don't see the anger in the Serbian cafes where young men speak in hushed tones of resistance. You don't see the telegrams passed between generals and diplomats, their language polite but brittle. You don't see the old system of empires and courts, of treaties and lineages, beginning to tremble beneath the weight of its own contradictions. But there is one man, boarding a train this morning in Sarajevo, who believes he can change the course of history with a single gun. And there is another man, a royal, whose car will take a wrong turn tomorrow, placing him in the sights of fate. Yet for now, you stand in your small, tidy room. You draw the curtain back and look down onto the street. A tram hums past. A flower seller arranges violets and roses in her basket. A policeman yawns and adjusts his cap. The day unfolds, gently, like the pages of a well-worn novel. Tomorrow the modern age will be born in blood. But tonight, the world still sleeps beneath the lullaby of an empire. The old world is still intact. You light your oil lamp. The amber glow dances on the walls. Outside, a piano plays softly from another apartment, something by Schubert. You lean on the windowsill and watch the stars emerge above the church spires. It is the last quiet evening of an age, and you are here to witness it. The morning of June 28th, 1914, breaks gently over the Balkan hills, with the light diffusing in soft sheets over the red-tiled roofs and narrow cobbled streets of Sarajevo. The mist lingers briefly in the valley of the Miljacka River, just long enough to soften the outlines of minarets, domes and Austro-Hungarian facades, the city's strange marriage of east and west. A call to prayer echoes from the mosque near Bashchashia, just as the bells of the Catholic cathedral begin their slower, deliberate ringing. You're walking through this waking world, passing between the old Ottoman bazaar and the more recent avenues built by imperial planners. The air smells of damp stone, roasted coffee, and early summer flowers. Few here know the date marks the anniversary of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo, a sacred wound in the Serbian memory when the medieval Serbian kingdom fell under Ottoman rule. But to some, the symbolism is not lost. In fact, it is everything. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, has come to Sarajevo with his wife, Duchess Sophie, for a ceremonial visit and to oversee military manoeuvres in Bosnia. It is meant to be a display of unity, a performance of imperial control. But tensions are high. The empire had annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina just 6 years earlier, enraging Serbian nationalists who saw the province as part of their natural homeland. And now, this royal visit, planned for the very day of Kosovo's anniversary, is viewed by some as a deliberate insult. You find yourself near the Apel Quay, the main road running beside the river, where the crowd has begun to gather in the growing heat. Children wave small flags. Soldiers in stiff uniforms line the avenue. Franz Ferdinand's open motorcade will pass here on its way to the town hall. The Archduke is not a popular man. He is known to be cold, impatient, a reformer perhaps, but one with little fondness for the rituals of monarchy. Sophie, on the other hand, is adored. Their marriage had been controversial, unequal in status, but she stands beside him today in quiet dignity, dressed in pale clothes that shimmer in the sun. Further down the road, hidden among the spectators, stand a group of young conspirators, 7 of them, spread out, each armed with pistols or bombs, members of a shadowy nationalist organisation known as the Black Hand. You pass one of them without noticing, a pale teenager with dark, sunken eyes and a shaking hand in his coat pocket. He looks like a student or a lost boy, but his heart is pounding with the belief that history is about to hinge on him. His name is Nedeljko Čabrinović. As the procession begins, with the Archduke seated stiffly beside Sophie in a grey open-topped Grafen-stiffed car, the first assassin loses his nerve and does nothing. The second makes a move. Čabrinović steps forward and hurls a bomb. It bounces off the folded roof of the Archduke's car and rolls beneath the vehicle behind them, exploding with a blast that injures a few officers and bystanders, but leaves Franz Ferdinand and Sophie unharmed. In the chaos, Čabrinović swallows a cyanide capsule and leaps into the river to drown himself, but the poison fails and the water is barely waist-deep. He is dragged out screaming by the police. You watch as panic ripples through the crowd, but the Archduke, visibly shaken and splattered with blood from his men, insists on continuing with the official programme. He proceeds to the town hall where he delivers his speech with a trembling voice, commenting bitterly that he has come to Sarajevo on a friendly visit and is now greeted with bombs. The mayor stammers through his prepared remarks, the mood strained and unreal. Something has broken. There is confusion, rising tension, a sense that the normal order of things, ceremonial, structured, imperial, is slipping out of the empire's grip. Afterward, Franz Ferdinand decides he wants to visit the wounded in the hospital. Plans are hastily redrawn, but no one informs the driver of the new route. The motorcade turns by mistake onto Franz Josef Street near the Latin Bridge. You're standing just a few paces away. A wrong turn, a moment's confusion. The driver slows, attempts to reverse, and there he is, standing just beside Moritz Schiller's Delikatessen, as if fate has placed him there. Another young man, slight and pale, with a pistol in his coat. Gavrilo Princip. He had failed to act earlier, had believed the chance had passed. Now it is given back to him. He steps forward and fires 2 shots. One strikes Sophie in the abdomen, the other pierces Franz Ferdinand's neck. He slumps, mouth opening in shock as blood spills down his collar. Sophie collapses beside him. Sophil, don't die. Stay alive for the children, he says faintly, before losing consciousness. She's already gone. The crowd freezes, a scream, then running. Soldiers drag Princip away, beating him as they go. You stand in the dust and sun with the silence roaring around you. 2 gunshots, that's all. And yet from these 2 cracks the world begins to shatter. Because this moment, is not an isolated tragedy. It is a spark cast into a field of dry hay. Around it, old alliances sleep like animals under brush, fragile and waiting. And now they begin to stir. The news spreads first through whispers and confusion, At the hospital, an official telegram is composed. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne is dead, assassinated by a Bosnian Serb nationalist. Within hours, it reaches Vienna by wire, coded and urgent, then Prague, then Berlin. Across Europe, telegraph operators tap out the words that will tilt the century off its axis. But in the first hours, no one is quite sure what it all means. Assassinations are not unheard of. In fact, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they are almost commonplace. Kings, presidents and prime ministers have been murdered before, and the world has moved on. But this is different, though not everyone can feel it yet. You walk along the Danube embankment in Vienna, where the air is heavy with summer heat and the scent of the river. A group of men gather near a kiosk reading a bulletin pinned hastily to a board. Black letters on white paper. Ermordet. Murdered. A hush follows the reading of the headline, not shock exactly, but something slower, deeper, as if the earth has shifted a few inches beneath their boots. In cafes and editorial rooms, in military offices and ministries, people begin to speculate, not with fear, but with a strange, almost reverent solemnity. The heir to the empire has been struck down in a province filled with ethnic tension and nationalist fire. It cannot go unpunished. Honour demands it. Back in Sarajevo, the streets are closed off. Troops patrol intersections. Windows are shuttered. Princip and his co-conspirators are already in custody, and the first interrogations have begun. They are young, malnourished, tubercular. They speak not like criminals, but like martyrs. Gavrilo Princip, barely 19 years old, talks of national unity, of liberation from Habsburg rule, of Serbia's destiny. The detectives and judges do not understand this kind of fanaticism. It frightens them more than the pistols. In the imperial palace in Vienna, Emperor Franz Joseph receives the news with weariness more than sorrow. He had never been fond of Franz Ferdinand, who was stubborn, independent, and had married beneath his rank. But the murder of an heir, the murder of a duchess, the insult to imperial prestige, these are wounds to the monarchy itself. A sense of moral outrage, of dynastic justice, rises like mist through the court. The old emperor, 83 and half shadowed by grief and memory, remains silent for a long time. Then, slowly, the machinery of empire begins to respond. You see it in the polished boots of officers hurrying through marble corridors, in the carriage wheels rattling through the Hofburg gates, in the coded messages sent to Berlin. The Austro-Hungarian Empire does not act quickly, but when it begins to move, it does so with centuries of inertia behind it, and Germany waits to be informed. Because Austria-Hungary, for all its ancient weight, is not alone. It leans heavily on its alliance with the German Empire, ruled by Kaiser Wilhelm II, a man of bombast, insecurity, and dreams of global power. You can almost hear the pens scratching in the German Foreign Office as the telegrams are decrypted. The Kaiser is informed that his friend Franz Ferdinand is dead, that the murderers were linked to Serbia, that Austria is planning something, perhaps a limited action, perhaps more, and Germany must decide, will it offer full support? This moment, this single decision, will be remembered as the blank cheque. In private meetings over stiff glasses of brandy and cigar smoke, German diplomats and generals tell their Austrian counterparts that they will stand by them no matter what course of action they take, full military support if needed. Austria, they say, has a right to retaliate. A great power must not be humiliated. A state must punish the hand that strikes its future. And in Belgrade, Serbia listens closely. Its government, though not directly involved in the assassination, knows the line between the Black Hand and the army is not always clear. The Black Hand operates in shadows, an underground movement of radicals and officers, with vague loyalties and deadly discipline. But to Austria, the distinctions do not matter. Serbia is held responsible. You stand now on the balcony of a hotel in Budapest. Below, people stroll along the Danube laughing, gesturing with wine glasses. The news has arrived here too, but it still feels far away, like thunder on the horizon. And yet in government offices papers are being signed, notes are being written, troop positions are being discussed. The assassination is no longer a singular event, it is becoming a justification. Because here is the deeper truth, one not printed in newspapers or spoken of aloud. The assassination has not caused the crisis, it has revealed one. For years, Europe has been sliding toward confrontation. Alliances and counter-alliances, war plans, military build-ups, diplomatic entanglements, All have made peace brittle, a surface tension stretched too far. Now, with this act of violence in a Balkan city, the surface begins to tear. Not in one place, but in many. In the minds of generals who see war not as tragedy, but as cleansing. In the hearts of nationalists who dream of expansion and revenge. In the corridors of bureaucrats who believe they can control escalation with carefully worded ultimatums. And in your step, as you walk through these days, you feel it. Something shifting beneath the heat and routine. A silence in the streets that wasn't there before. A hesitance in people's voices. The clock is still ticking, but it seems to echo now, each second louder than the last. Soon the first ultimatum will be drafted, and it will not be designed for negotiation. In the days that follow the assassination, something changes in the tone of the empire. The sorrow expressed at first in wreaths and ceremonies begins to harden into something else. Sharper, calculated, deliberate. You're in Vienna still, and already the black mourning banners draped over government buildings have become less about grief and more about symbolism, about posture. In the cafes, where people once debated art and opera, the talk now is of retribution. The Archduke's funeral is quiet, stripped of grandeur, attended by few foreign dignitaries, not out of disrespect, but because Europe is holding its breath. Behind closed doors, Austria-Hungary prepares its response, and it is not a measured one. On July 7th, in a session thick with heat and cigar smoke, the Austro-Hungarian Council of Ministers meets to determine its course. One man in particular, Foreign Minister Count Leopold Berchtold, pushes for decisive action. He's not seen as bold by nature, more bureaucrat than statesman, but now he speaks of Serbia in blunt terms. Not just punishment, he says, but a reckoning. This is their chance to reassert imperial power in the Balkans, to strike before pan-Slavism spreads further and undermines the monarchy from within. The council agrees. Serbia must be presented with demands so harsh, so inflexible, that they cannot possibly accept them. War, not resolution, is the intention, but it must appear, at least briefly, as diplomacy. And so begins the writing of the ultimatum. You pass the days watching the city shift. The newspapers remain cautious, but tension simmers beneath the print. On July 23rd, the ultimatum is delivered to Belgrade, a 10-point list of demands, cloaked in legalistic language but designed to provoke refusal. It calls for Serbia to suppress nationalist propaganda, to dissolve organisations Austria considers hostile, to remove officials from duty, to arrest named individuals, and, most controversially, to allow Austro-Hungarian police to operate on Serbian soil during the investigation. In any sovereign state, this final point would be intolerable. It amounts to partial occupation. But Austria includes it anyway, and the deadline is short. Serbia has 48 hours to respond. You're in Belgrade now, where the heat is dry and bright, the streets narrow and dusty. People here are anxious, not unaware of what is coming. The Serbian government debates in circles. They know that rejecting the ultimatum likely means war. They also know that Russia, their powerful Slavic ally, watches from the north. The Tsar has promised support, vaguely, cautiously. But will he actually move if Austria invades? On July 25th, just before the deadline expires, Serbia delivers its reply. It is conciliatory, even surprising. They agree to almost all of the demands. They offer cooperation, but they cannot, will not, allow foreign officials to operate within their borders. This one point, they say, violates their sovereignty. They suggest arbitration by international powers. It is a reasonable response by diplomatic standards, but it is not what Austria wanted. The reply is read aloud in Vienna. Berchtold studies it without expression. Within hours, the Austro-Hungarian ambassador leaves Belgrade. Diplomatic relations are broken, and the mood in Vienna shifts again, toward movement, toward inevitability. Trains are quietly placed on alert. Military schedules are reviewed. The music of the cafes still plays, but the eyes above the coffee cups are sharper, more anxious. In Berlin, the German leadership is briefed. The Kaiser is on his yacht when the news arrives, and for a moment he is taken aback. He believes Serbia's reply might be enough to avoid war. He writes in the margins that it is a great moral victory for Vienna. But his ministers disagree. The momentum is already set. Berlin reaffirms its support. The blank cheque still holds. Germany will back Austria in whatever follows, and in Russia the gears begin to shift. Tsar Nicholas II is hesitant. He does not want war, but he also cannot afford to see Serbia humiliated. The pan-Slavic sentiment runs strong in his court. Advisors urge partial mobilization. Just a warning, they say. Just a show of strength. No one imagines it will spiral. You feel it in the air wherever you go now. This tightening, this slow, grinding turn of diplomatic wheels. There are still letters being written between monarchs. The so-called willy-nilly correspondence between the Kaiser and the Tsar, where they call each other cousins, promise to preserve peace, speak of misunderstandings. But behind these letters, the military schedules run on rails, untouched. The trains begin to fill with men, and on July 28th, exactly 1 month after the assassination in Sarajevo, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. It begins with artillery shells across the Danube, explosions over Belgrade, bridges destroyed, barracks burning, civilians flee, troops march with rusted rifles and fraying uniforms, officers ride ahead on horses that sweat under the weight of imperial banners. A war has begun, and yet it does not feel yet like the kind of war that will change the world. It is still a local matter, contained, like so many Balkan conflicts before it. But this war, you begin to understand, is no longer confined to Serbia and Austria, because behind Austria stands Germany, and behind Serbia, Russia, and across the continent, the great alliance system of Europe, fragile, entangled, misunderstood, begins to stir awake, dragging its nations with it. In London, Paris, Berlin, and St. Petersburg, telegrams flicker and click through the nights, sleepless eyes scanning them for keywords. Ambassadors rush between ministries. Foreign offices light their lamps past midnight. Armies prepare. War has begun. Not yet the world war, not yet the total collapse, but the fuse has been lit, and it burns faster than anyone imagined. The declaration of war by Austria-Hungary on Serbia is not just a moment of violence. It is the first stone tumbling down a fragile mountain, and behind it, more stones are already shifting. On the evening of July 28th, as artillery shells light the sky over Belgrade, the rest of Europe watches, not passively, but with growing agitation, like chess players staring at a board they suddenly no longer understand. For decades, the continent has operated under a careful, tangled web of alliances, mutual guarantees, and quiet threats. But now, as you walk the boulevards of Berlin, or the back corridors of the French Foreign Ministry, you begin to feel it. The alliances are no longer theoretical. They are beginning to activate. In St. Petersburg, the Russian court is pulled between caution and pride. The Tsar hesitates, but the ministers around him, men like Sergei Sazonov, argue that Serbia must not fall under Habsburg boots. Russia is the guardian of Slavic interests. Its influence in the Balkans is already fragile. To remain still now would be to surrender to Austria and Germany without a shot fired. On July 29th, Russia orders partial mobilization, troops to be moved toward the Austro-Hungarian frontier, not yet Germany's. It is meant as a message, not a threat. But in this moment, even messages can become weapons. Mobilization is not a gesture. It is not a word to be used lightly. To mobilize in 1914 is to begin the irreversible unwinding of military plans constructed years in advance down to the hour. Trains, timetables, stockpiles, depots, they all depend on precision. Once set in motion, these plans cannot be undone without chaos. You're in the office of a Russian general now, and he is rubbing his temples in frustration. Partial mobilization is a myth, he mutters. You either mobilize or you don't. There is no half step when the trains begin to roll, and in Berlin the telegrams are received with alarm. Germany has watched Russia's movements with a mixture of arrogance and dread. The German General Staff, led by men like Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, has long feared a war on two fronts, France in the west, Russia in the east. Their solution, created years earlier, is the Schlieffen Plan, a rapid invasion of France through Belgium, knocking the western enemy out quickly before Russia can fully mobilize. But the plan is rigid. It allows no delay. The moment Russia moves, Germany must strike. On July 31st, Germany issues an ultimatum to Russia. Stop mobilization immediately or face war. The clock ticks. The silence on the Russian end is taken as an answer. That evening, Germany mobilizes its own army. At the same time, another ultimatum is delivered to France, a demand for neutrality in the coming conflict. But France cannot comply. Her alliance with Russia is ironclad. To abandon it now would be suicide. On August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. The fuse is nearly gone now. Sparks fly toward the powder. France responds in kind. Mobilization begins. The boulevards of Paris fill with notices and uniformed men. You hear the slow, hypnotic chant of marching boots along the cobblestones. There is no cheering yet, only a tense building rhythm, like drums in a dark theatre, signalling that the curtain is rising. And in Belgium, a quiet, orderly country of canals and cathedrals, a dark cloud begins to settle. The Schlieffen Plan requires German troops to cross Belgian territory in order to reach France quickly. But Belgium is neutral, protected by international treaty. Germany sends a message: let us pass through peacefully, or we will consider you an enemy. The Belgian king refuses. He may be small, his country may be small, but sovereignty is not measured in kilometres. Now you are in London. The British cabinet is divided. The public is unsure. Britain has no formal obligation to France or Russia, only an entente, a friendship. But the violation of Belgian neutrality is something else, a red line, an affront to law and treaty. Foreign Secretary Edward Grey speaks quietly in the Commons, warning that if Britain does nothing, she will be dishonoured. On August 4th, Germany invades Belgium. That evening, Britain declares war. You walk outside into the London night. It is warm but strange. A kind of stillness lingers in the city, as if something immense has just stepped into the room and no one knows how to look at it. At 11 p.m, the war begins. Lamps are dimmed, trains are rerouted, ships are recalled. In barracks and factories, the machinery of conflict roars to life. And the old world, the one that for all its flaws, its monarchies, its treaties, its uniforms and etiquette, had managed to avoid a major war for nearly a century, begins to collapse. The alliances have snapped into action like loaded traps. What began as a regional issue, a murder in Sarajevo, a dispute in the Balkans, has now entangled every major power in Europe. The balance has failed, and more than that, something deeper has cracked. A belief that war could still be limited, restrained, managed. The diplomacy of the 19th century has given way to the catastrophe of the 20th. You're standing now on the threshold, in the streets of Berlin, Paris, Vienna, St. Petersburg, London. Men cheer, not yet knowing what they're cheering for. Newspapers print maps and poetry. Trains fill with volunteers. Flags fly from balconies. But underneath it all is a sense, felt dimly, like a shadow passing behind the moon, that something terrible has begun, and it cannot be undone. In the first days of August 1914, the war is still a promise. Clean, noble, swift. You're in Berlin, and the air hums with the sound of mobilization, the sharp whistle of trains, the clatter of boots on platforms, the rustle of uniforms being unpacked and buttons polished. The posters go up overnight. Your emperor needs you. To Paris in 40 days. Schoolboys shout the headlines from street corners. The crowds at the train stations sing. Women wave handkerchiefs. Men lean from windows with their hats raised. No one weeps, not yet. There is a sense, almost a joy, that something long delayed is finally happening. It is the same in Paris, in Vienna, in St. Petersburg. Not everywhere equally, and not without fear, but the fear is quieted by years of conditioning. You have heard for so long that the world was preparing for this, that perhaps part of you had wanted it, just to end the waiting. The decades of armament, of silent threats and uneasy alliances now justify themselves. Politicians speak of defence and duty. Bishops bless the canons. Philosophers say it is necessary, a cleansing, a rebirth of the spirit. The machine is in motion. But you see something else if you step back from the capital cities and look at the borders. On August 4th, as German columns move into Belgium, the facade of limited war begins to tear. The Schlieffen Plan, for all its precision, was never designed for restraint. Its goal is swift, total victory in the West, to crush France in weeks before Russia can fully mobilise. To do that, the German army must move fast across neutral Belgium toward Paris. The Belgian army, smaller, under-equipped, is expected to give way, but it does not. At Liège, the first major battle of the war, Belgian forts hold longer than expected. You're there, standing among the rubble of ancient stone bastions as artillery shells scream overhead. German infantry advance through mist and gun smoke, only to be driven back again and again. It is not glorious. It is not clean. German generals, frustrated, unleash heavy siege guns, the monstrous big Bertha cannons, and level the forts with shocking ease. The Belgians, overwhelmed, fall back. But their resistance slows the timetable. Every day lost in Belgium is a day Russia advances in the east, and then the civilians begin to die. You do not hear of it at first in the newspapers, but word filters back through letters, through whispers, through Belgian refugees arriving in London and Paris. In villages like Dinant, Andenne, Louvain, names barely known before, German troops commit atrocities. They round up civilians, execute suspected resistors, burn homes and libraries, accuse entire towns of guerrilla attacks. In Louvain, the great university library, centuries of books and manuscripts, is burned to ash. It is not random. It is policy, a doctrine of Schrecklichkeit, frightfulness, meant to deter resistance by example. You're standing in a ruined church, ashen glass crunching beneath your boots. A girl walks past you barefoot, leading her younger brother. There is no crying, only the sound of wind against the open rafters. The war in this moment is no longer about honour or speed or strategic necessity. It is about terror. It has touched civilians. It has blurred the lines. In France, the armies mass along the frontier. The French strategy, known as Plan 17, relies on rapid offence, a belief in national spirit, in élan, in the moral superiority of the French soldier. But the German advance is not poetic. It is mechanised, timed, relentless. Still, France hurls its soldiers forward into Alsace and Lorraine, wearing bright blue coats and red trousers, as if still fighting in the 1870s. The result is disaster. Whole divisions are cut down by machine guns, their commanders still speaking of courage and discipline. The bodies lie thick in the wheat fields, red and blue, stiff and silent. You stand on a ridge and watch stretcher bearers moving among the fallen. They do not speak. Their faces are grey with dust and disbelief. A priest kneels beside a man with no lower jaw. Behind him, a field hospital overflows with the wounded, and the doctors, still wearing their civilian hats, still believing this war will be over by harvest, begin to understand that they are not equipped for what is coming. And then, unexpectedly, Russia moves faster than anyone had believed. 2 Russian armies march into East Prussia, threatening Germany's eastern flank. Panic surges through Berlin. The plan was to avoid this, to end France before Russia could act. Now, the timetable is broken. Germany pulls troops from the west to deal with the east. The new front opens. More trains, more timetables, more men. At the Battle of Tannenberg, the Germans strike back with ruthless precision. Under General Hindenburg, they encircle and annihilate a Russian army, taking tens of thousands of prisoners. The victory is total, but the war has expanded. It is no longer confined to the Franco-German border. It has become a continental fire. And across the Channel in England, the first British Expeditionary Force lands in France. Small in number but highly trained, they move quietly, confidently, into a war they do not yet understand. British soldiers fight their first engagement at Mons, holding back superior German forces with discipline and expert marksmanship. But they too are forced to retreat. The British line bends, the French fall back toward the Marne, the Germans advance, Paris is within reach. You're walking now along a road lined with refugees, thousands trudging on foot, pushing carts, carrying children, leaving behind homes they will never see again. The war is not supposed to be here, they say. Not this far, not this fast, but it is. The illusion of a short war is dying. The belief in honour, in swift cavalry charges and decisive victories, is being buried beneath trenches and barbed wire. The uniforms are already turning brown with mud. The songs sung at the train stations are already silent, and still the war grows. Soon, the world beyond Europe will begin to answer its call. By early September 1914, the war has spread beyond the borders of Europe. What had begun as a local affair, rooted in imperial tension and Balkan disputes, is now becoming a global phenomenon. Not because the world understands what's happening, few truly do, but because treaties signed in calmer decades now come to life with a cold inevitability. Across oceans and continents, distant colonies and dominions begin to stir, answering the call of empires. Flags are raised, telegrams sent, ports seized, and men conscripted into a war whose origin many will never fully grasp. You're in London again, standing in a humid office at Whitehall, where civil servants wipe sweat from their collars and shuffle through the latest dispatches. Britain's declaration of war has turned not only her army toward France, but her navy toward the world. The Royal Navy, vast and polished, moves to blockade German ports and hunt German ships wherever they sail. British cruisers are spotted in the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, off the Cape of Good Hope. Naval supremacy, once a symbol of pride, is now an active weapon, slow, methodical, strangling German trade as the months begin to turn. And in Germany, overseas ambitions begin to collapse. The colonies, Togoland, Cameroon, German East Africa, Qingdao in China, were the pride of Wilhelmina imperialism. Now they are liabilities. British and French troops, along with Japanese forces, descend upon them. In the Pacific, German Samoa falls without a shot. In Africa, the fighting is more brutal. In the tangled, humid jungles of Togoland, colonial troops march through thick brush, through heat and disease, firing at enemies they never expected to face. But the war does not simply draw in empires by administrative order. It reaches into the hearts of millions through loyalty, identity, and the weight of obligation. You walk now along the docks of Bombay, where Indian volunteers board ships under the British flag. Sepoys from Punjab, Gurkhas from Nepal, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims. They come by the tens of thousands dressed in khaki and carrying rifles into a European war that promises adventure, reward, perhaps glory. Few yet imagine they will be fighting in the frozen mud of Flanders before winter. From Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Dominions answer the call. In Montreal, young men queue in long lines under banners that say, "For King and Country." In Melbourne, the newspapers print stirring speeches, invoking duty, empire, civilization. In Cape Town, officers brief their men for deployment in East Africa. And in Wellington, church bells ring as troop ships depart. The war is now drawing upon the manpower and resources of a quarter of the globe. Back in Europe, the German advance into France reaches its high water mark. In early September, just as Paris prepares for the worst, the French and British forces rally at the Marne. You stand in the fields where the battle unfolds, rolling farmland, crisscrossed with hedgerows and poplars. The air smells of smoke, wet grass, and blood. The French commander, General Joffre, issues his orders with the calm of a man who no longer believes in strategy, only necessity. The Germans, stretched thin and overconfident, are halted. They are pushed back, not destroyed, but slowed, blunted. The war of movement begins to sputter. Then something strange happens. Both sides, now exhausted, begin to dig. First, shallow trenches, then deeper ones, then networks, communication lines, machine gun nests, barbed wire. Trenches from the Swiss border to the North Sea, growing daily inch by inch. A new kind of war, unnatural and slow, is being born in the mud. You're standing now in one of these trenches, just a shallow ditch, 6 feet deep, held together with timber and sandbags. It is wet. It stinks. Rats move through the straw bedding. The men smoke to cover the stench. Letters from home are passed along the line, already smudged with damp fingers. A chaplain walks the edge of the trench, murmuring prayers between artillery blasts. Overhead the sky is low and grey, as if pressing the world flat. This is not a battlefield, not anymore. It is a limbo. Neither side can move and neither can leave. Autumn comes, then rain, then cold. The rifles rust if not cleaned daily. Food arrives late, sometimes spoiled. New recruits arrive wide-eyed and leave hollowed out if they leave at all. The dead are buried in the walls of the trench when the ground is too dangerous to cross. Boots rot. Skin breaks. The front is no longer a line but a wound, festering, permanent. And yet, the world continues to pour in. In October, the Ottoman Empire signs a secret treaty with Germany. The ancient empire, stretched and brittle, sees a chance to recover prestige and territory. On November the 2nd, it declares war on Russia. Within days, Britain and France declare war on the Ottomans. Now the war has entered the Middle East. Now the oil fields of Mesopotamia, the deserts of Sinai, the shores of the Dardanelles, all become new fronts. You travel through this shifting geography, from the mud of Ypres to the palaces of Constantinople. Everywhere, lines are hardening, trenches deepening, hopes narrowing. There is still no clear winner, only more dead, more confusion. Christmas approaches. It has been 5 months since Sarajevo, and already the numbers are staggering. Hundreds of thousands dead, millions in uniform, nations reshaped. But still, many believe this cannot last long. Some say it will end by spring, Some believe one more offensive will break the enemy. Some, walking through ruined villages and listening to the silence between shell bursts, are beginning to understand. The old world is already gone. By the winter of 1914, the war has settled into something no one expected. A stillness that isn't peace. A waiting that isn't safety. Along the Western Front, from the North Sea down to the Swiss frontier, the lines of trenches have frozen in place, not metaphorically but quite literally. Snow gathers in the corners of dugouts. Ice forms in the barrels of rifles left unattended. Water collects in the bottom of the trenches, freezes, melts, freezes again. Men huddle in greatcoats stiff with mud, pressing their backs to the walls of earth and timber, listening. There is always something to listen for. The crack of sniper fire, the whistle of a distant shell, the sloshing of boots in the trench across the wire. You are here, somewhere near Armentières, and the air smells faintly of wood smoke and rot. The frost dulls the edge of the stench, but not completely. Everything is soaked. The wool, the sandbags, the rotting duckboards, the very skin of the men who sleep in wet socks. A soldier scratches a name into the wood of a dugout beam. Another writes a letter home that will be censored before it ever reaches his village. Still, they write. They build tiny fires with rations crates, boil tea in dented tins. Rats dart through the straw, lice burrow into seams. The war is no longer glorious. It is no longer fast. It is something else now, low, grinding and permanent. And yet, elsewhere, the world keeps moving. In the east, vast movements of men still unfold across snowfields and plains. Russia, still reeling from its defeat at Tannenberg, begins to show its deeper cracks. Not just military inefficiency, but political weakness. A Tsar who commands without clarity, a system already overstrained. In Galicia, Austro-Hungarian forces struggle against Russian waves, retreating through deep snow, their casualties mounting. The empire, once thought to be a rock in the centre of Europe, begins to splinter under the weight of a war it cannot control. In the Caucasus, Ottoman and Russian troops clash in brutal mountain campaigns. Entire divisions vanish in avalanches, in frostbite, in ambushes fought above the tree line. In Anatolia, the seeds of internal violence begin to stir. The Ottoman state, fearful of revolt, increasingly suspicious of its Armenian population, begins to draw up plans. Already, the logic of the war, us versus them, safety through elimination, is beginning to work its way into civilian policy. In Britain, the war is felt first through absence. The sons who once delivered bread, taught school, played cricket, are gone, replaced by women in overalls, boys in uniforms too large for their frames, newspapers with long lists of names in narrow columns. Recruiting posters still appear on every corner. Your country needs you. But some no longer look. The first casualty lists are trickling back. The numbers are small, still bearable, but they grow. In town halls and village greens, memorials are already being planned, not for the war, which is still young, but for the dead, who arrived too soon. And then, on Christmas Eve, something happens that nobody wrote into the war plans. You're standing on the edge of a trench near Ypres. The frost is crisp, the sky is clear. From the German lines comes something strange, a song. It is faint at first, barely a murmur, then louder, Stille Nacht. In the quiet between shell fire the sound carries. Along the trench line men stop moving. Some peek above the parapets. Then a voice in English shouts back, "We hear you!" More songs follow, in different tongues, awkward and off-key. Then lights, small, flickering. Candles along the edge of the trench, perched on bayonets, balanced on crates. In the cold darkness, something entirely unexpected begins to unfold. The next morning, Christmas Day, small groups emerge into no man's land, hesitant at first, unarmed. They approach each other slowly, Germans, French, Scots, Belgians, unsure if it is a trap. But it is not. They meet. They shake hands. They share cigarettes, buttons, photographs, chocolate. A football appears somewhere. A kick, then a cheer. For a few brief hours the war is forgotten, not everywhere and not for long. Some officers forbid it, some sectors keep firing. But in enough places to matter, men who were trying to kill each other the day before now stand side by side, speaking in gestures and fragments of foreign words, trying to remember what it was like not to be enemies. Then, just as quietly as it began, the truce ends. Orders come down, The generals are displeased. The war resumes. The guns roar again, and men return to their trenches. But something has changed. For a moment, they saw through the curtain. They saw the men on the other side not as Germans or French or British, but as mirror images, cold, hungry, afraid, just like them. The high commands of every nation understand the danger of that moment. A war cannot be fought by men who recognise each other's humanity too clearly, and so the war hardens. In January, artillery grows heavier, machine guns more numerous, barbed wire thicker. Raids are ordered not for territory, but to keep men angry, aggressive, afraid. Propaganda grows darker. Civilians are warned of spies. The press speaks of betrayal, barbarity, and duty. The image of the enemy must be preserved, grotesque, monstrous, inhuman, or the armies may not march much longer. The long war has begun, and by the spring they will all realise it. By March 1915, it is clear to nearly everyone, to generals, to soldiers, to civilians huddled over ration books, that the war is not ending soon. Not with a single blow, not with a clever manoeuvre, not with diplomacy. It has congealed into something else, an architecture of death, vast and mechanical, feeding itself. Each side believes it is close to breaking the other. Each side believes the next offensive will do it, and so they plan, not for peace, but for scale. This spring you find yourself in northern France, standing above a network of tunnels and redoubts outside a town no one had heard of before the war, Neuve-Chapelle. It is here that the British will launch one of their first major attacks, an attempt to test their growing industrial capacity, their coordination with French forces, and their belief that the enemy's lines can be broken by concentrated fire. At dawn, the sky glows pale violet, then orange. The artillery opens. The sound is no longer shocking. It is routine, almost, like a grim heartbeat. For 35 minutes shells rain down on the German positions, churning up barbed wire, timber, bodies. The noise is immense, yet you begin to recognise its shape. The dull thud of high explosive shells, the sharp crack of shrapnel bursts, the whine of fuses before they land. Then silence, followed by whistles. The British infantry rises from the trenches, rifles fixed, boots heavy with mud. They walk forward, not run, through the smoke and cratered ground, into the wreckage of the German front. At first, it works. Surprise is achieved. Sections of the enemy trench are taken. But then, confusion. Communications fail. Some units press too far. Some stop too early. German reinforcements arrive. Counterattacks begin. By nightfall, the British have taken ground, but not much, and at a cost. Over 11,000 casualties for a gain of less than 2 kilometres. The war is now measured in yards and lives. Back in London, the papers print maps and headlines. Enemy routed at Neuve-Chapelle. But the officers in the War Office read the reports with unease. There is no rout. The Germans are not broken. They are adapting. They are deepening their trenches, building strong points, rotating divisions with greater efficiency. The war, already mechanical, is becoming institutional, and something else is changing. In Berlin, in Paris, in London, factories begin to hum with new intensity. Ammunition production is no longer a matter of stockpiles. It is a national endeavour. Shells are counted not by crates but by the thousands, the tens of thousands. In the Midlands, women begin to take up jobs once barred to them, working lathes, driving delivery carts, filling fuses. Their hands stain yellow from TNT, their hair thins from exposure. They are called munitionettes, and their labour will fuel the war just as surely as the coal beneath their towns. In Germany, the concept of total war begins to take shape. Food is rationed. Imports falter under the British blockade. Ersatz goods appear. Synthetic rubber, artificial coffee, paper clothing. Civilians are told that hardship is patriotic. Children collect metal for shell casings. Old men speak of sacrifice. And in the east, things grow darker. In the snowbound reaches of Ottoman Anatolia, under the banner of war, a policy begins to unfold in silence and in secret. Armenian communities, already suspected of disloyalty by the Ottoman state, are rounded up. Some are sent into the desert, some are killed outright. Others vanish on long marches with no food, no water, no destination. The word genocide does not yet exist, but what is happening has no other name, and while the world's attention is fixed on the trenches of Europe, Entire villages are erased. You're in Gallipoli now, a long strip of rugged coastline, cliffs and beaches, wind and thorns. In April, the Allies land here, hoping to force open the Dardanelles, to strike at the Ottoman heart and relieve pressure on the Russian front. The troops come from Britain, from France, from Australia and New Zealand. The landings begin at dawn, soldiers wading ashore into wire and rifle fire, climbing cliffs that bristle with machine guns. They dig in, they fight for months in heat and dust in trench lines only meters apart. The water is scarce, the flies are thick, the corpses pile up in ravines too dangerous to reach. Gallipoli becomes another stalemate, a different shape but the same ending. Another place where the war finds a rhythm: attack, hold, die, retreat, repeat. In the trenches above Anzac Cove, men write letters home describing the stars, the silence between shells, the sense of waiting for nothing in particular. It is not fear that dominates here, it is futility. And in Russia, revolution begins to stir. The Tsar remains distant, unreachable, obsessed with court ritual and family. But in the cities, in the factories, in the bread lines, the people grow restless. Soldiers grumble. The losses are vast. Entire regiments vanished into the swamps of Galicia, the hills of the Carpathians. Supplies are poor, morale is worse, the empire is bleeding and still it marches. Across Europe you begin to hear a new word, whispered first, then shouted: attrition. It is not victory they speak of anymore, it is endurance. The hope is no longer to outmaneuver but to outlast, to kill faster than you are killed, to starve the enemy before your own larders run dry, to keep the lines manned 1 week longer than they can. In quiet barracks and high command salons, there is still talk of breakthroughs, of new fronts, of grand offensives in the summer. But you walk through the field hospitals, and you see something else. Rows of men with empty sleeves, with faces covered by bandages, with eyes that no longer follow movement. Gas is beginning to appear now. Chlorine at first, then phosgene, creeping along the ground, hugging the contours of the trenches, turning lungs to liquid. Soldiers choke, drown in air. Doctors struggle to understand. Masks are issued. Orders change. A new fear joins the war. Spring brings flowers to the countryside, the trees bloom, the birds return, but nothing grows in no man's land, and nothing returns from it whole. By mid-1915, the war has become not just a contest of armies, but a struggle for the very survival of empires. The European powers, old, proud and bound by centuries of tradition, are discovering the limits of their reach. None are immune, none are winning, and though maps have not yet changed, everything underneath them is beginning to shift. You find yourself now in Vienna. The streets, once lined with carriages and music, feel thinner somehow, not empty, but quieter. The cafes are still open, but fewer linger. The conversations are shorter, more guarded. The capital of the Habsburg Empire no longer feels certain of itself. The war has drained its colour. Young men wear uniforms or black armbands. The court still hosts dinners, still speaks in the old ritual tones, but something invisible has been lost. An energy, a confidence, a sense that time was still on their side. In the ministries there are whispers about the Slavs in Galicia, about the Czechs in Bohemia, about the Hungarians watching carefully from Budapest. The empire, a patchwork quilt of languages, loyalties and grudges, is beginning to fray. The monarchy, ancient and ritualistic, pretends otherwise, but the old glue, the Austro-Hungarian army, has taken staggering losses. Men are being conscripted faster than they can be equipped. The Russians, despite their own disasters, still loom on the Eastern Front. The Habsburgs have weathered storms before, but never one like this. Never one fought in so many places at once for no clear end. Meanwhile, Germany, though militarily more successful, begins to show cracks of its own. You walk through Berlin and see banners calling for steel, bread, soldiers. The war is on every wall, every factory door. The blockade imposed by Britain is now biting. There is still food, but less of it. The black market thrives. Ersatz flour, ersatz butter, ersatz hope. Children chew on rubber toys for want of sweets. A loaf of bread that cost 30 pfennigs a year ago now costs double, if it can be found. The people remain patriotic, but they are watching. At the General Staff headquarters in the Königsplatz, officers study maps with lines that do not move. Every assault is a gamble. Every trench line a monument to the failure of speed. The Schlieffen Plan, once believed near mathematical in its certainty, is now buried beneath the mud of Belgium and northern France. In its place, new theories emerge, about deep reserves, flexible defence, and massed artillery fire. It is no longer about the brilliance of manoeuvre, it is about calculation, attrition. How many men can be lost before the other side breaks first? Far to the south, in the Balkans, the war expands again. Bulgaria watches carefully. Serbia, though battered, remains unbroken. But isolation is beginning to weigh. The Central Powers eye the region with growing hunger. The Balkans are not just old battlegrounds, they are arteries of supply, of routes to Constantinople, of pride and revenge. A second offensive against Serbia is planned. This time, the goal is total destruction. Meanwhile, in Britain, the losses at Gallipoli have dampened the illusions of quick victory. The beaches are still held, but the peninsula has become a trap. Water is scarce. Disease spreads faster than bullets, and still, men are sent there, from Lancashire, from Auckland, from Marseille. The war has no patience for hesitation. Every front must be held. Every front must be reinforced, even those that have no clear future. You are walking now in a narrow lane near Whitechapel. London remains untouched by the front lines, but it is no longer safe. In the evenings, people glance up at the sky. Zeppelins. Silent, pale, luminous like ghostly whales. The first air raids have begun. Not often, not many, but real. High explosives dropped onto rooftops. The terror is out of proportion to the damage. That is their purpose. The war is not far anymore, it is above. In May, a ship sails from New York bound for Liverpool. Its name is RMS Lusitania. It is fast, proud, a peacetime marvel. But the seas are no longer peaceful. German U-boats now prowl the Atlantic, enforcing their own brutal logic of blockade. On the 7th of May, U-20 fires a torpedo into her hull off the coast of Ireland. She sinks in 20 minutes. Nearly 1,200 souls lost. Among them, American citizens. The world watches. In Washington, there is outrage. President Wilson pens letters, firm, measured. The German government responds with regret, but no apology. The logic of total war does not bend easily to diplomacy. For now, the United States remains neutral, but something has shifted. Public opinion stirs. The idea of safety across the ocean begins to fade. The war has cast a long shadow even here, and in the trenches the war goes on. A new offensive begins in Artois. The French hurl men and shells at the German lines. Casualties mount by the hour. Then, in September, the British launch the largest attack yet at Loos. Chlorine gas is used again. It drifts across the battlefield, green and low, but the wind shifts. It comes back toward the British lines. Men tear at their masks. Some survive, some do not. The offensive gains ground, then falters. Nearly 60,000 casualties in 3 weeks. Another attempt to break the deadlock, and another confirmation that there is no simple key to this war. The idea of a quick victory is gone. Now no one speaks of months. They speak of next year, of what happens if it lasts until 1916, of how to keep the men willing, how to keep the factories running, how to keep the nations from turning on themselves. You walk through a ruined village outside Arras, a church without a roof, a schoolroom with torn maps and collapsed desks. A doll lies in the mud, its face half melted by fire. You bend down, pick it up, and for a moment you wonder if the world that built this village, the world of quiet schools and harvest festivals and chapel bells, is ever coming back. Then, somewhere behind you, a whistle blows, and the guns begin again. By late 1915, the toll of the war weighs heavily on every corner of Europe. The once vibrant cities and peaceful countryside now bear the scars of relentless conflict. Their landscapes marked by shattered homes, scorched fields and silent cemeteries. You find yourself in a small village just behind the front lines near Verdun, a place already known by many as a symbol of endurance and despair. The war has become a measure of human suffering, counted not only in miles of trench or tons of artillery, but in the countless lives, young and old, that it consumes. The letters you hold in your hands are stained with tears, dust, and mud. Each envelope carries a story, a name, a hope slowly eroded by months of waiting, loss, and fear. Mothers clutch these letters tightly, hoping for news of sons, husbands, fathers. Soldiers write home from the muddy depths of their dugouts. their words often careful and guarded, seeking to protect their loved ones from the harsh reality they face daily. The village church, once the heart of the community, now serves as a makeshift hospital. Rows of stretchers line the nave, each holding a man scarred by bullet or shell, many with bandages soaked through and faces pale with exhaustion. Nurses move quietly, their faces set with a determined calm as they tend to wounds that defy healing and to spirits stretched thin by pain. Outside, the soft crunch of footsteps on frost-bitten ground punctuates the stillness. In the distance, the guns never fully cease. Their deep rumble is a constant reminder of the war's presence. Some days the artillery feels almost like a living thing, its growl ebbing and flowing with the wind, sometimes distant and faint, other times deafening and close, shaking the earth beneath your feet. In the trenches, men pass their days in monotonous cycles of vigilance, digging, repairing, and enduring the relentless cold, rain, and mud that seep into every crevice of their existence. Amid this hardship, small moments of humanity flicker. Soldiers share makeshift meals, recount stories from before the war, or exchange trinkets found on the battlefield. Sometimes a song drifts across the wire, fragile but defiant, a brief thread connecting men on both sides. Yet, beneath these moments lies a deeper melancholy. Each man knows that another day may bring death or the loss of a friend. Meanwhile, beyond the trenches, the empires that sent these men to fight begin to feel the strain of endless conflict. In Paris, rationing grows stricter, and strikes in factories ripple through the city. News from Russia grows darker. Unrest in Petrograd and Moscow hints at deeper fractures in the Tsarist regime. The war has stirred not only armies, but also the restless forces of revolution. As winter melts into spring, the world waits, caught in a fragile balance between hope and despair. The war grinds on, relentless and unyielding, its outcome still uncertain, but its cost already staggering. As 1916 dawns, the war shows no sign of mercy or resolution. The frozen stillness of winter slowly gives way to the tentative stirrings of spring, but beneath the thawing earth, a new, grimmer chapter is preparing to unfold. You stand again on the Western Front where mud has replaced snow, and the trenches have become deeper, wider, and more fortified, an endless maze of concrete, wire, and steel. The landscape resembles a scarred wound, with shell craters filling with water, and the skeletal remains of trees reaching like desperate fingers toward the pale sky. The generals of the great powers have begun to plan offensives so vast that they seem to swallow the horizon. Among these, the French under General Joffre and later General Nivelle prepare for what will become known as the Battle of Verdun, a name that will soon become synonymous with endurance, suffering, and the stubborn will to resist. Verdun is more than a battlefield. It is a symbol, a fortress city on the Meuse River that the French cannot afford to lose, nor the Germans to take. You are with a group of French infantrymen as they trudge toward the front lines. Their faces are weary but resolute, eyes reflecting both dread and determination. They carry the weight of their nation's hope as much as their rifles and packs. The air is heavy with the smell of damp earth, gunpowder, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Around you, the shattered countryside is eerily quiet, as if holding its breath before the storm. On the German side, commanders view Verdun as an opportunity to bleed the French army dry, bleed them white, by forcing them to defend a position so vital that they must commit their best troops again and again. Artillery is massed like never before, and the production of shells has become a central focus of war economies. Every factory, every worker, every resource is bent toward the relentless demand for munitions. In the months that follow, the battle unfolds with brutal intensity. Artillery barrages shake the earth for hours, turning fields into quagmires of mud and shattered stone. Infantry assaults surge and falter, the front lines shifting little despite the enormous cost. Trenches collapse under shell fire, tunnels flood, men disappear into the chaos. Casualties mount into the hundreds of thousands on both sides. You witness a moment of rare calm amid the turmoil. In a trench, soldiers share a cigarette, their faces illuminated by the weak light of a single candle. They speak quietly of homes left behind, of gardens, children, simple pleasures, and of a future that feels distant and uncertain. The war has become a test not just of strength, but of spirit. Elsewhere, the British prepare for their own massive offensive on the Somme. With new tanks and improved artillery tactics, they hope to break through the German defences and relieve pressure on Verdun. But the Somme will become a nightmare of its own, where thousands of lives will be lost in the mud, beneath barbed wire and under relentless fire. Beyond the battlefields, the world is changing. The strains of total war transform societies, economies, and politics. In Russia, the hardships of war deepen the dissatisfaction that will soon erupt into revolution. In the Ottoman Empire, fronts stretch thin as conflicts rage from Mesopotamia to the Caucasus. Across the globe, colonies send troops, labourers and resources, drawn into a conflict that seems to grow without end. As spring ripens towards summer, you sense that the old world, its empires, its hierarchies, its certainties, is cracking under the pressure. The war is no longer a series of battles, but a vast grinding force, reshaping nations and lives with every passing day. Summer 1916 brings with it a sense of grim anticipation. The fields near the Somme River, once lush and green, have been transformed into a wasteland, muddy, cratered and lifeless. You find yourself among the British forces preparing for what is planned to be a decisive offensive, intended not only to break the deadlock on the Western Front, but to deliver a shock from which the enemy cannot recover. The generals speak in precise, confident tones, but beneath their words lingers an unease, a fragile hope that the battle might turn the tide of a war that has already lasted 2 years. For days, the British artillery pounds the German lines, firing millions of shells intended to destroy barbed wire defences and demoralise the enemy troops. The ground trembles beneath your feet as explosions echo ceaselessly, a relentless storm of sound and destruction. You watch soldiers, weary and tense, waiting in the trenches, their faces smudged with dirt and worry. They hold their rifles tightly, glancing at the sky, at the horizon, at one another, as if seeking strength in shared fear. On July 1st, the infantry advances across no man's land. Thousands step out of the trenches, only to be met by a hail of machine gun fire and artillery. The ground is strewn with the fallen, friends, neighbours, young men who had set out with hope and now lie motionless in mud and blood. The slaughter is vast and immediate. The reality of industrial warfare crushes illusions of glory. For many, the battle becomes a nightmare of noise, confusion and endless suffering. Despite the terrible losses, the British and their allies press on. Over the following months, waves of attacks carve small patches of territory from the German lines, each gained at a heavy price. The Somme is not a quick victory, but a slow, grinding war of attrition. The landscape changes with every explosion. Forests are flattened, villages reduced to rubble, rivers swollen with rain and blood. Among the soldiers, the mood fluctuates between stoic determination and quiet despair. Letters home speak of comrades lost, of dreams deferred, of a longing for the peace that seems ever more distant. The war has become a vast machine that consumes bodies and spirits alike, grinding down the old hopes of swift resolution. Back home, families wait anxiously for news. Casualty lists grow longer. The pain of loss spreads across communities, reshaping the fabric of society. Women take on new roles in factories and farms, holding together economies and homes as men fight and die at the front. The world shifts beneath their feet, old certainties dissolving in the face of sacrifice and uncertainty. Yet, amid this darkness, there are moments of courage and humanity, an act of kindness from a stranger, a shared song beneath the stars, a brief ceasefire to retrieve the wounded. These flickers of light remind you that even in the depths of despair, the human spirit endures. The Battle of the Somme will continue for months, and its echoes will reverberate far beyond the fields where it was fought. It marks a turning point, not in the sense of swift victory, but in the shattering of illusions about the nature of modern war. The old world, with its faith in honour and glory, is giving way to a new reality defined by sacrifice, endurance, and the relentless march of industrial conflict. While the Western Front captures much of the world's attention, vast battles rage far to the east, where the war takes on a different character, shaped by vast distances, rugged landscapes, and shifting alliances. You find yourself now somewhere near the dense forests of Galicia, a region contested by Austria, Hungary and Russia, where the clash of empires unfolds against a backdrop both wild and ancient. The soldiers here endure hardships that differ from the trench warfare of France and Belgium. The cold bites deep in winter, and the heat saps strength in summer. Supplies are scarce, roads are often little more than dirt tracks, and communication is unreliable. The front lines stretch over hundreds of miles, making coordination a constant challenge. Here, mobility and endurance become as important as firepower. The Russian army, vast but often poorly equipped, pushes westward with a mixture of bravery and desperation. Their hopes rest on the promise of sweeping through Galicia and opening a path to the heart of Austria-Hungary. But the Habsburg forces, despite internal divisions and growing discontent, fight fiercely to hold their territory. Battles here are marked by brutal close quarters, fighting in forests, villages, and on hillsides. Among the troops are diverse groups: Slavs, Hungarians, Germans, Czechs, Poles, each with their own histories and loyalties, woven together in the fragile fabric of empire. Language barriers and cultural differences complicate coordination, but shared hardship binds them. In the trenches and camps, men exchange stories of home and survival, sometimes in broken phrases, sometimes in gestures and songs. Beyond the battlefield, the civilian population suffers greatly. Villages are burned or requisitioned. Families are displaced or caught in crossfire. Starvation and disease spread, fed by the disruption of agriculture and trade. Refugees move slowly across the countryside, carrying what they can. The war has become a calamity not just for soldiers, but for all who live in its shadow. In the imperial capitals, worries deepen. The Austro-Hungarian government struggles to maintain order as nationalist movements gain strength. Calls for reform grow louder, but the machinery of war demands unity and obedience. The Tsar's regime in Russia faces mounting unrest as military failures and economic hardship fuel revolutionary fervour. The fragile peace of decades seems to unravel with each passing day. Despite the grim conditions, moments of camaraderie and resilience shine through. Soldiers share food, write letters, and cling to memories of home. In rare quiet hours, the forests echo with the distant sound of birdsong, and the night sky offers a glimpse of stars untouched by war. As the battles in the east drag on, the war's impact spreads beyond Europe's borders. The conflict pulls in new allies and colonies, reshaping the world's political map. The old empires, once seemingly invincible, reveal vulnerabilities that will soon change everything. The Eastern Front is vast, complex, and often overshadowed by the West's carnage, but its story is no less vital. It is a theatre where empires struggle not just for territory, but for survival, and where the cracks in the old world's foundation begin to widen. As 1916 stretches on, the war's relentless grind begins to crack the very foundations of the old empires, not just on distant battlefields, but deep within their capitals and hearts. You find yourself transported now to Petrograd, once St. Petersburg, the imperial capital of Russia, a city of wide boulevards, elegant palaces, and the faint echo of Tsarist grandeur fading into an uncertain present. The air here is thick with more than just the smoke of industry and coal fires. It carries whispers of change, unrest, and a simmering impatience that seems to hum beneath the surface. The Russian Empire, vast beyond measure, is a land stretched thin by war. The armies have suffered repeated defeats, resources are drained, and the burden of supply weighs heavily on civilians and soldiers alike. In the crowded streets, queues for bread grow longer with each passing day, and murmurs of discontent echo in marketplaces and factories. The war's demands have fractured society, turning neighbour against neighbour as hunger and fear spread. Inside the Winter Palace, the Tsar, Nicholas II, grapples with the impossible task of leading a nation at war while navigating political turmoil. His decisions feel increasingly detached from the realities faced by his people. The government is riddled with inefficiency and corruption. Ministers come and go, but the crises deepen. Meanwhile, the powerful aristocracy clings to tradition and privilege, unwilling or unable to grasp the profound changes sweeping across their land. Outside the palace walls, the city pulses with the energy of revolutionary ideas. Workers gather in factories, exchanging stories and songs of hope and resistance. Intellectuals meet in smoky cafes, debating the future of Russia and the fate of the Tsarist system. Bolsheviks and Mensheviks, anarchists and socialists, all vie for influence among a restless population yearning for change. The war has become a catalyst, exposing the inequalities and weaknesses of a society already on edge. You walk through the Nevsky Prospect, observing faces lined with exhaustion and resolve. Women, many of whom have lost husbands or sons to the front, organise demonstrations calling for peace and bread. Strikes ripple through the city's industrial centres. Soldiers returning from the front lines bring stories of horror and despair, fueling the fire of unrest. The police attempt to maintain order, but their presence only heightens tensions. In the countryside, too, the old order is unravelling. Peasants, burdened by taxes and conscription, begin to seize land and resist authority. The church, long a pillar of imperial power, struggles to maintain influence amid growing scepticism and hardship. Across Russia, the seeds of revolution are taking root, watered by years of suffering and the stark failures of war. Meanwhile, the war abroad rages on, its distant thunder a constant reminder of the stakes involved. The Allies and Central Powers both watch Russia with wary eyes, knowing that instability within such a vast empire could reshape the conflict entirely. Diplomats and spies weave intricate webs of intrigue, each seeking advantage in the shifting landscape. As autumn deepens, the pressures mount. Food shortages worsen. The railways falter under strain, unable to deliver the essentials to starving cities and exhausted armies. The Tsar's authority erodes, challenged by the rising influence of the Duma and revolutionary groups. The year closes with an uneasy tension, as if the entire empire holds its breath waiting for a spark. You sense that the old world, the world of emperors and empires, of rigid class structures and ancient rites, is nearing its breaking point. The war, which began as a contest of armies and territories, has become a crucible for transformation. The foundations are shaking. The winds of revolution, once faint whispers, are growing into a storm that will soon sweep away the old order forever. While Europe's great powers clash across the western and eastern fronts, far to the southeast, the ancient Ottoman Empire fights a desperate battle to hold on to its remaining territories. You find yourself walking the dusty streets of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, a city where the shadows of minarets and domes stretch over narrow alleys and bustling bazaars. The city hums with a mixture of resilience, anxiety, and the lingering grandeur of an empire that has ruled for centuries but now teeters on the brink of dissolution. The Ottomans entered the war on the side of the Central Powers, driven by a mix of strategic calculation and a hope to reclaim lost lands. Yet, the realities of the conflict prove harsh and unforgiving. The Empire's resources are stretched thin, its armies battered in campaigns across harsh deserts, mountains and distant fronts. Disease and hunger ravage both soldiers and civilians, compounding the hardships of war. The Gallipoli Peninsula has become a grim symbol of the struggle. Allied forces attempted a massive invasion in 1915, aiming to open a sea route to Russia and knock the Ottomans out of the war. But the Ottoman defence, under commanders like Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, holds firm. The battle is brutal and costly for both sides, marked by relentless fighting on jagged cliffs and in muddy trenches. The courage and sacrifice displayed here will echo through history. Inside Constantinople, the war's toll is felt deeply. Food shortages lead to rationing, markets grow quiet. The streets, once vibrant with trade and festival, seem subdued. The ruling Young Turks grapple with internal dissent and the complexities of governing a multi-ethnic empire fracturing along ethnic and nationalist lines. Armenian, Arab, Kurdish, Greek, and other communities each face their own trials and uncertainties, many caught between loyalty and resistance. The Ottoman Empire's alliances strain as the war continues. Battles stretch from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the hills of the Caucasus. British forces press forward in the Middle East, capturing Baghdad in 1917, while Arab revolts, fueled by promises of independence, undermine Ottoman control over the Arabian Peninsula. The empire is becoming a battlefield for not only armies, but also competing visions of the future. Amid the turmoil, the people of Constantinople navigate their daily lives with a quiet resilience. Families gather in dimly lit rooms, sharing stories and memories. The call to prayer echoes across the city, a reminder of faith and continuity amid upheaval. Musicians play soft melodies on the streets, and children weave through the bazaars, momentarily escaping the weight of the world around them. Yet, beneath this fragile calm, you sense the undercurrents of change. The old empire, once vast and seemingly eternal, is unravelling. Its fate is tied not just to military victories or losses, but to the hopes and fears of millions whose lives have been irrevocably altered by war. The Ottoman Empire's struggle is a poignant chapter in the story of 1914's legacy, a tale of resilience, tragedy, and the inexorable march of history. The map of the Middle East will soon be redrawn, shaped by the outcomes of battles and the dreams of new nations. The summer of 1917 brings a palpable shift in the atmosphere of Central Europe, particularly within the vast and complex Habsburg Empire. You now find yourself wandering through Vienna, the imperial capital, where the once glorious halls and grand boulevards still echo with music and elegance. But beneath the surface, the city is fraught with tension, uncertainty, and a quiet despair. The golden age of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy feels like a distant memory, slipping further away with each passing day. The empire, a patchwork of dozens of nationalities and languages, is straining under the pressure of a war that has dragged on far longer than anyone expected. Soldiers from Bohemia, Hungary, Galicia, Croatia, and beyond have fought bravely, but the costs have been staggering. Food shortages and inflation bite deeply into everyday life, and the front lines have bled the empire's youth to exhaustion. In the cafes and salons of Vienna, discussions turn from art and music to politics and the future. Nationalist sentiments rise among various groups, each dreaming of autonomy or outright independence. The delicate balance that once held the empire together now teeters on the edge of collapse. The imperial court struggles to maintain control, but their efforts are undermined by war fatigue and a growing sense that the old order cannot endure. You find yourself walking past the Hofburg Palace, imagining the grand banquets and decisions made within its walls, decisions now overshadowed by the grim realities outside. Soldiers return from the front, many wounded or broken in spirit, their experiences fueling dissatisfaction and demands for change. Workers strike for better conditions, while political agitators gain followers in the city's streets. In the eastern provinces, the situation is even more precarious. Galicia has been devastated by conflict, its towns and villages destroyed or abandoned. The Slavic populations there, caught between Russian advances and Austro-Hungarian retreat, grow restless. The empire's military leaders struggle to hold the front, while political leaders grapple with the impossible task of balancing competing national interests. Amidst the chaos, Emperor Charles I ascends to the throne in late 1916, inheriting a realm on the brink. He seeks to negotiate peace and reform, but his efforts are hampered by entrenched interests and the ongoing conflict. The war's momentum, fueled by deep-seated rivalries and alliances, carries on like a storm no leader can easily tame. Despite all, life continues in the city's quieter corners. You hear the strains of a violin drifting from an open window, smell freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, and glimpse families clinging to moments of normalcy amid uncertainty. But the sense of an ending lingers. An empire that once seemed eternal is unravelling, swept away by the currents of war and the unrelenting demand for change. The Habsburg Empire, with all its history and complexity, will soon be no more. The borders and identities forged over centuries will be redrawn, the old monarchies replaced by new nations born from the chaos. As 1917 unfolds far across the Atlantic, a new and unexpected force begins to tip the balance of the war. You're now in New York City, the bustling heart of a nation that, until recently, has watched the conflict from afar, maintaining a stance of neutrality. The streets hum with the energy of a city on the move, its towering skyscrapers casting long shadows over crowded sidewalks, while the docks overflow with ships bound for Europe. For years, the United States had sought to avoid entanglement in the European war, embracing a policy of isolationism rooted in geography and tradition. But the tides begin to turn as German submarine warfare threatens American vessels and lives, and revelations of clandestine German efforts to incite unrest in Mexico stir outrage. The sinking of the Lusitania and other attacks have already strained relations, but the breaking point arrives in early 1917 with the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, a secret German proposal to Mexico offering support for reclaiming lost territories if it joined the war against the United States. The American public, once divided, now rallies behind the call to arms. President Woodrow Wilson, after careful deliberation, asks Congress to declare war on Germany in April 1917. The mood is a mix of resolve and apprehension. The country prepares to send its young men to a conflict unlike anything it has ever faced. You walk among the crowds in Central Park, sensing the mixture of excitement and anxiety. Young men enlist in droves, their faces bright with patriotic fervour, but shadowed by the unknown horrors to come. Factories accelerate production of weapons, uniforms and supplies. The nation mobilizes with a speed and efficiency that astounds the world. The US entry into the war injects fresh hope into the weary Allied powers. American soldiers, known as doughboys, begin to arrive in Europe in large numbers by late 1917 and early 1918, their presence shifting the strategic calculus. Their arrival signals not just an influx of troops and resources, but a symbol of a new kind of modern power, industrialized, determined, and poised to reshape the world order. At the same time, the American home front transforms. Women step into roles in factories and offices, challenging traditional norms. Propaganda campaigns stir patriotism, but also suspicion and censorship. The war's reach extends into every corner of society, weaving itself into the national fabric. Though the fighting will continue for more than a year, the entry of the United States marks a turning point, an inflection moment when the balance begins to tip decisively against the Central Powers. The old world, weary and fractured, now faces a new and powerful force. As 1917 marches onward, the vast expanse of Russia trembles beneath the weight of war and revolution. You find yourself once again in Petrograd, the heart of an empire unravelling at its seams. The city pulses with energy and tension. Crowds gather in icy squares, voices rise in protest, and the air is thick with the promise of transformation and the threat of violence. The February Revolution has already swept away the centuries-old rule of the Romanovs. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated, ending a dynasty that had held sway for over 3 centuries, and a provisional government has taken its place. Yet the new leaders struggle to assert control over a nation weary of war, hunger and inequality. Their decision to continue fighting only deepens public dissatisfaction, and the streets fill with workers, soldiers and peasants demanding peace, land and bread. You move through the crowds, feeling the palpable mix of hope and frustration. Bolshevik leaders like Vladimir Lenin seize this moment, calling for an end to the war and the transfer of power to the Soviets, councils of workers and soldiers. Their slogans resonate with many, especially the war-weary and the poor, who see in them a promise of radical change. The summer months bring strikes, protests, and increasingly violent clashes. The provisional government falters, unable to address the needs of its people or to manage the army's collapsing morale. Desertions become rampant, and the once proud Russian army teeters on collapse. As autumn approaches, the Bolsheviks grow stronger, preparing for what will become the October Revolution. The city braces itself for upheaval. Factories halt production, communications flicker, and armed workers patrol the streets. The old order is slipping away, replaced by a new, uncertain future. Outside Petrograd, Russia's vast countryside is similarly in turmoil. Peasants seize land from landlords, local militias form, and rival factions vie for control. The empire's collapse is not just political but social and cultural, a profound rupture that will reshape the nation and the world. This revolution is not merely a change of government, it is the violent uprooting of an entire way of life, a final shattering of the old world's last great empire. The echoes of this upheaval will reverberate for decades to come, influencing ideologies, borders and lives far beyond Russia's vast borders. As 1918 dawns, the world stands at a precarious crossroads. The exhaustion of 4 long years of war weighs heavily on every soldier, every city, and every family touched by the conflict. You find yourself once again on the Western Front, where the landscapes of France and Belgium bear the scars of endless battles, trenches carved deep into the earth, shattered trees, and fields littered with remnants of war. The spring air carries a fragile hope, tinged with anxiety, as the final chapters of this immense conflict begin to unfold. The German High Command, aware that their window for victory is narrowing, launches the Ludendorff Offensive in March 1918. This series of bold and desperate attacks aims to break the Allied lines before the full might of the fresh American forces can be brought to bear. You watch as thousands of troops surge forward, crossing no man's land with a mixture of determination and fear. The initial advances are significant, pushing the Allies back and sowing confusion. But the offensive stretches German resources to their limit. Supply lines strain, troops grow weary, and counterattacks begin to chip away at their gains. Meanwhile, the Allies, bolstered by the influx of American soldiers and renewed coordination among their forces, begin to mount their own offensives. Slowly but surely, the tide turns. In the cities behind the lines, news of battlefield developments mingles with the whispers of political upheaval. Germany itself is roiled by unrest. Workers strike, soldiers mutiny, and the Kaiser's authority falters. The Central Powers face similar crises. The Austro-Hungarian Empire's multi-ethnic army fractures along national lines. Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary all edge toward armistice as the war's end looms. You sense the crumbling of old empires, the Habsburgs, Ottomans, and Romanovs, all pushed to the brink by the relentless forces of modern war and political upheaval. Borders that once seemed eternal blur and vanish. New nations begin to emerge from the ruins, their futures uncertain but irrevocably changed. On November 11, 1918, the guns fall silent. The armistice is signed, and the world exhales a weary breath. But peace does not bring immediate relief. The scars of the conflict run deep. The political, social, and economic upheavals set in motion by this war will echo through the decades, reshaping societies and ideologies in ways no one could have predicted in the hopeful days before June 28, 1914. The day that started with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand has led to the destruction of an old world, a world of empires, monarchies, and rigid hierarchies. From the ashes rise new nations, new ideas, and a new, uncertain order. In the aftermath of the armistice, the world's focus shifts from the battlefield to the negotiation table. You find yourself seated in the Grand Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris, surrounded by the opulence of gilded halls and the heavy weight of history in the making. Delegates from the victorious Allied powers gather here in 1919, tasked with deciding the fate of the defeated Central Powers and reshaping Europe's fractured landscape. The Treaty of Versailles becomes the centerpiece of these discussions, a document intended to secure lasting peace but destined to sow seeds of future conflict. Germany faces harsh penalties, reparations that cripple its economy, territorial losses that shrink its borders, and strict limitations on its military. The once mighty empire is humbled, forced to reckon with the consequences of war and its own aggressive ambitions. Meanwhile, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, now dissolved, fragments into new nation-states, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and others, each striving to forge identity from the ruins. The Ottoman Empire's remnants are parcelled out under the Mandate system, with Britain and France carving spheres of influence in the Middle East, igniting tensions that will reverberate for generations. As you wander through the halls of Versailles, you feel the weight of these decisions, hope mingled with uncertainty. The old world's borders are erased, replaced by lines drawn with pens rather than armies. For many, these new nations promise self-determination and renewal. For others, they plant the bitter seeds of grievance and division. Beyond the grand rooms, the world is already shifting. Economies struggle to recover, populations mourn millions lost, political ideologies clash as socialism, nationalism and democracy vie for dominance. The peace is fragile, a delicate balance that history will soon test. The Treaty of Versailles stands as a symbol of the war's profound impact, not just on geography and politics, but on the very fabric of societies. It marks the definitive end of the old imperial order, while ushering in an age marked by both hope and profound uncertainty. In the years following the Treaty of Versailles, you find yourself wandering through the quiet streets of a European city, perhaps Paris, London, or Berlin, where the scars of war are still visible but life begins to move forward with cautious steps. The faces around you carry traces of exhaustion and loss. Many are young, but their eyes hold the weight of experiences far beyond their years. They are part of what will come to be known as the Lost Generation, a cohort shaped and marked by the horrors of the Great War. The war has fundamentally altered not only borders but the collective psyche. You hear the subdued conversations of veterans who struggle to reconcile memories of trench warfare, shell shock, and the unimaginable carnage with the demands of returning to civilian life. The vibrant cultural scenes of the 1920s, literature, art and music, often reflect this sense of disillusionment and search for meaning amid upheaval. Economically, the continent is unstable. Many nations face inflation, unemployment, and the challenges of rebuilding infrastructure destroyed by 4 years of conflict. Socially, women, who took on new roles during the war, begin to assert greater demands for rights and recognition. The old hierarchies have been shaken, but the path forward remains uncertain and fraught. Meanwhile, the political landscape is shifting dramatically. New ideologies emerge or gain momentum. Communism spreads from revolutionary Russia, fascism takes root in Italy, and nationalist movements stir unrest in many regions. The fragile Peace of Versailles seems to some like a mere pause, a calm before another inevitable storm. You feel the lingering shadow of 1914 in every corner, the day the world's old order began to crumble, leading to profound transformations that shaped the entire 20th century. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was a spark, but the fire it ignited continues to burn in unexpected and enduring ways. After the war, the map of Europe has been redrawn with great care but also with much uncertainty. You find yourself walking along the borders of these newly formed states, places like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia and Poland, each a mosaic of peoples brought together by treaty rather than history. The excitement of newfound independence mingles with tensions, old rivalries, and the challenge of forging unity from diversity. In Prague, the streets are alive with conversations about democracy and self-determination. People debate how to build a nation that respects the many ethnic groups within its borders, Czechs, Slovaks, Germans, Hungarians, and how to reconcile their distinct cultures. Yet, beneath the surface, nationalist sentiments simmer, fueled by memories of past oppression and fears for the future. Further south, in the Balkans, the creation of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, later Yugoslavia, brings together a patchwork of ethnicities with often competing aspirations. The memory of the assassination that sparked the war still lingers here, a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined history and politics remain. You walk through the streets of Sarajevo, sensing the weight of history and the fragile hope for peace. Poland, restored to the map after over a century of partitions, awakens with a sense of rebirth and challenge. Its people face the task of uniting lands once divided among empires, while guarding against threats from neighbours wary of a strong Polish state. Across these new nations, the spirit of nationalism grows, sometimes as a unifying force, sometimes as a source of division. The old empires have fallen, but their legacies persist in complex ways. Borders drawn by diplomats struggle to contain identities and loyalties that do not easily conform to lines on a map. In this delicate post-war world, the dreams of self-determination and national pride coexist with the realities of political instability and economic hardship. The promise of the new order is real, but so are the shadows of conflict yet to come. As the old Ottoman Empire dissolves under the weight of defeat, the Middle East undergoes one of the most profound and lasting transformations sparked by the war. You now find yourself wandering through the ancient streets of Damascus, the scent of spices and jasmine lingering in the warm air, where the echoes of centuries mingle with the uncertainties of a new era. The people here, like those across the region, from Baghdad to Jerusalem, face a future shaped not by their own rulers, but by faraway powers redrawing boundaries with ink and ambition. The League of Nations, formed in the hope of preserving peace, delegates control of former Ottoman territories to Britain and France under a system called mandates. These mandates, while officially framed as a form of guardianship, are in practice a new kind of imperial rule. Britain takes control of Palestine and Iraq, while France governs Syria and Lebanon. The promises made to Arab leaders during the war, hinting at independence in exchange for revolt against the Ottomans, now seem broken. The region is rife with feelings of betrayal and frustration. In Damascus, intellectuals and political leaders debate fiercely about the future. Some dream of a pan-Arab unity, a vision of independence and self-governance stretching across the desert and mountains. Others are wary, cautious about the divisions along tribal, religious and ethnic lines that complicate such dreams. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret wartime pact between Britain and France carving up the Middle East, looms like a shadow over these discussions, a stark symbol of foreign manipulation. Meanwhile, in Palestine, tensions begin to mount as waves of Jewish immigrants arrive, encouraged by the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which supported a national home for the Jewish people. This influx creates unease among the Arab population, setting the stage for decades of conflict. You can hear whispered conversations in market squares, reflecting both hope and fear, aspirations for a homeland and anxieties over displacement. Iraq faces its own struggles as the British face uprisings and resistance from local tribes unwilling to accept foreign control. The clash between traditional tribal leadership and the imposition of Western-style governance creates instability. The oil beneath the sands adds a new and powerful dimension to these struggles, drawing global interest and complicating the political landscape further. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the imposition of mandates bring an end to centuries of Islamic caliphate rule, but fail to resolve the deep-rooted complexities of identity, power and loyalty in the region. The borders drawn in Versailles, and thereafter are lines on maps but mean far more on the ground, lines that divide families, communities and histories. As you walk through the bazaars, you witness the mixture of resilience and tension, the coexistence of age-old traditions and the sharp realities of modern politics. The Middle East stands at a crossroads, shaped by the legacies of the war and the decisions made far beyond its deserts and cities. The seeds sown here in the wake of 1914's cataclysm will grow into conflicts, alliances, and transformations that reverberate throughout the 20th century and beyond. The old world has ended, but the stories it left behind continue to unfold in the streets, homes, and hearts of millions. As the dust of war settles over the Middle East, you now find yourself in the Anatolian heartland, where the remnants of the Ottoman Empire grapple with the devastating consequences of defeat and occupation. The once sprawling empire that had spanned 3 continents is no more, fractured by war, foreign mandates, and internal upheaval. The cities of Constantinople, now Istanbul, are heavy with the weight of transition, their ancient walls witnessing the final act of an empire's long decline. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920, carves up the Ottoman territories, stripping away vast regions and imposing severe limitations on sovereignty. Allied powers, particularly Britain, France, Greece, and Italy, carve out zones of influence, and the prospect of a divided Anatolia sparks outrage among many Turks. The capitulation is a national humiliation that stirs the embers of resistance. You walk alongside the streets filled with fervent discussions and impassioned voices. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, a former Ottoman officer turned nationalist leader, rises as the figurehead of a movement dedicated to resisting foreign control and reclaiming Turkish sovereignty. His vision is revolutionary, to discard the old Ottoman order and build a secular modern nation-state based on Turkish identity and unity. The Turkish War of Independence begins, pitting nationalist forces against occupying armies and local collaborators. Towns and villages rally to Ataturk's cause, united by a shared desire to overturn the imposed treaty and shape their own future. The conflict is brutal and intense, but also marked by a fierce sense of purpose and renewal. In 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne replaces Sèvres, recognising the boundaries of the new Republic of Turkey and affirming its sovereignty. Ataturk's reforms begin rapidly transforming society, secularising government, adopting the Latin alphabet, and encouraging industrial and educational development. The centuries-old Ottoman Caliphate is formally abolished, severing the tie between religion and state. As you walk through Ankara, the new capital, you sense the optimism and determination of a society forging a path between tradition and modernity. But the legacy of empire's fall and the trauma of war linger in the collective memory. For many, the new Turkey is both a break and a continuation, a nation shaped by the hopes and hardships of a turbulent past. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the birth of modern Turkey mark a profound shift in the balance of power in the Middle East and the wider world. It is a testament to how deeply the events set in motion on that summer day in 1914 reverberated far beyond Europe, reshaping lives and landscapes across continents. As the Great War draws to a close, you find yourself in the heart of Central Europe, in the bustling city of Vienna, a place once vibrant with imperial grandeur, but now heavy with uncertainty and fading splendour. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a complex mosaic of ethnicities and cultures ruled by the Habsburg dynasty for centuries, teeters on the brink of collapse. The war has exposed and deepened fault lines that had long simmered beneath the surface. Nationalistic fervour among Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Slovenes, and others threatens to unravel the imperial fabric. You walk through the grand boulevards, past imperial palaces and cafes where conversations swirl with apprehension and hope. Soldiers return from the front carrying the scars of trench warfare, while political leaders grapple with mounting pressure for autonomy and independence from the empire's many national groups. The old world's order, so meticulously maintained for generations, crumbles rapidly. By late 1918, revolutionary fervour grips cities across the empire. In Prague citizens declare the formation of Czechoslovakia, uniting Czechs and Slovaks into a new nation, with dreams of democracy and self-governance. In the southern reaches, the kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovens, soon to be known as Yugoslavia, takes shape, a bold experiment in unity among diverse peoples with a shared desire to escape imperial domination. Vienna itself becomes a city caught between past and future, its imperial court dismantled, its society searching for new identity amid political upheaval. Emperor Karl thus abdicates, signalling the end of Habsburg rule, while new republics and states emerge, each wrestling with the challenges of sovereignty, ethnic tensions, and the scars of war. The dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire signals a dramatic shift in Central Europe. Centuries-old loyalties dissolve, replaced by nascent nationalisms that promise self-determination, but also sow seeds of future conflict. Borders are drawn hastily, sometimes arbitrarily, and the legacy of imperial rule, both cultural richness and bitter divisions, lingers deeply. In this time of transformation, the old world's collapse is most visible here. The grandeur of empire gives way to the fragility of new nations seeking their place in a changed Europe, their paths uncertain and their futures intertwined with the war's unresolved aftermath. In the cold, grey dawn of 1917, you find yourself standing on the snowy streets of Petrograd, the capital of the Russian Empire. The air is thick with the biting chill of winter and the palpable tension of a society on the brink. For centuries, the Romanovs ruled this vast empire, their dynasty unbroken since 1613, their power wrapped in the aura of divine right and absolute authority. Yet, as the war drags on, the cracks in this grand imperial edifice become impossible to ignore. The Russian people, peasants, workers, soldiers, are weary beyond measure. Food shortages plague the cities. The war effort demands endless sacrifices while the rich and powerful remain insulated from hardship. In the crowded factories you hear the hum of whispered discontent, while on the streets protests gather momentum. Soldiers, many of them young and terrified, return from the front lines disillusioned and broken, questioning the very rulers they once revered. February 1917 marks the eruption of revolution. You walk through Petrograd amid a swell of crowds, women leading marches for bread, workers striking, soldiers fraternizing with civilians. The Tsar's authority crumbles almost overnight as the Duma, Russia's parliament, demands his abdication. Nicholas II steps down, ending centuries of Romanov rule, and a provisional government steps in, promising reforms and continuation of the war. But the provisional government struggles. It is caught between the demands for peace and the obligations of alliances, between the old order's remnants and the revolutionary tide swelling beneath. The people's patience wears thin as hunger, inflation, and war fatigue worsen. In the background, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seize upon this chaos, advocating for peace, land, and bread, their calls for radical change growing louder. October brings the Bolshevik Revolution. You find yourself amid the tense, shadowed streets of Petrograd as armed workers and soldiers storm the Winter Palace, toppling the provisional government. The old empire is finally shattered, replaced by a new regime promising equality and the end of war. But this promise comes with its own upheavals: civil war, repression, and the reordering of Russian society. The Romanov family, once the symbol of imperial grandeur, meets a tragic fate in the remote town of Yekaterinburg. Their execution in July 1918 marks not only the physical end of a dynasty, but the definitive collapse of Imperial Russia's old world. In the aftermath, the Russian Empire fragments into a battlefield of ideologies and competing powers. The scars of war and revolution run deep, and the fate of millions hangs in the balance. The collapse of this empire is a powerful testament to the profound and often violent transformations set in motion by the assassination on that summer day in 1914. As the old empire fades into memory, the vast lands of Russia plunge into a new kind of chaos. The Bolsheviks, now in power after the October Revolution, face immediate and fierce opposition. You find yourself moving through the devastated countryside and ruined cities, where the bitter clash between red and white forces rages, a civil war that will last for years and shape the destiny of the region. The Red Army, under leaders like Trotsky, fights to consolidate the revolution, seeking to transform Russia into a socialist state based on Marxist principles. Meanwhile, the White Armies, a fragmented coalition of monarchists, liberals, and foreign-backed forces, struggle to restore the old order or carve out their own visions of Russia's future. The war is brutal and merciless. Cities like Moscow and Petrograd are sites of intense fighting and political upheaval. Famine and disease sweep across the land, and millions suffer amidst the turmoil. You witness the desperation of peasants caught between armies, the uncertainty of soldiers fighting not for a homeland but for ideologies, and the harsh policies imposed to maintain control. In 1922, after years of bloodshed, the Bolsheviks emerge victorious, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, is formally established. This new entity marks a radical departure from the imperial past, a centralized authoritarian state intent on reshaping society, economy and culture according to communist ideals. The Romanovs are gone, the Tsarist regime dismantled, and a new world order in Russia has begun. But the Civil War's aftermath leaves scars deeper than the political transformations. Communities are divided, trust shattered, and the scale of suffering leaves an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. The old empire's vastness remains, but its soul has been irrevocably changed, replaced by a state that will both inspire and terrify the world in the decades to come. The collapse of the Russian Empire and the birth of the Soviet Union are among the most profound consequences of the war ignited in 1914, a testament to how a single day's violence could ripple through history, reshaping nations and ideologies in ways unimaginable at the time. As the dust settles over Europe and the Middle East, you find yourself in the capitals of newly minted nations: Prague, Warsaw, Belgrade, Budapest. Cities humming with the cautious optimism of freshly declared independence. The empires that once dominated these lands have vanished almost overnight, replaced by republics and kingdoms experimenting with democracy and self-rule. The old order, with its monarchies and aristocracies, lies in ruins, but the future feels uncertain, fragile, and fraught with unresolved tensions. In Czechoslovakia, you walk the streets of Prague, where the air buzzes with intellectual fervour and cultural revival. The nation is a tapestry of Czechs and Slovaks, trying to weave a common identity amid lingering ethnic divisions. Meanwhile, in Poland, restored after over a century of partition, the struggle to unify diverse regions under one flag proves challenging, with borders still contested and populations displaced. Yugoslavia, too, is a bold experiment, an attempt to unite Serbs, Croats, Slovenes and others under a single crown. Yet the differences between these groups run deep, and the new state grapples with questions of governance, minority rights, and national identity. These challenges underscore the difficulty of creating lasting peace and unity in a region long marked by ethnic complexity. In Hungary, the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire brings humiliation and upheaval. The brief establishment of the Hungarian Soviet Republic is swiftly followed by a conservative backlash, illustrating the political instability that many of these new states face. The trauma of war and the weight of lost empire haunt the collective memory, shaping politics for years to come. Meanwhile, the democracies of Western Europe, like France and Britain, struggle with the enormous human and economic costs of the war. Societies mourn millions lost, and veterans return to changed worlds, grappling with reintegration and often profound disillusionment. Throughout this time, the League of Nations tries, with limited success, to mediate disputes and prevent new conflicts. Yet, the peace settlements made in the wake of 1914's cataclysm, while ending the war, often plant the seeds of future discord. The collapse of these great empires signals the end of an era, but also the beginning of a precarious new world order. Fragile democracies emerge amid the ruins, each navigating the difficult path between hope and the legacies of division, trauma, and unmet aspirations. The grand halls of the Palace of Versailles are heavy with the weight of history as you imagine standing there in 1919, surrounded by leaders from across the world. The air is thick with smoke from countless cigarettes, murmurs of diplomatic negotiation, and an undercurrent of tension that belies the formal setting. The First World War has ended, but the work of defining peace is proving to be just as complex and fraught as the conflict itself. The Treaty of Versailles aims to redraw the map of Europe, punish Germany for its role in the war, and establish mechanisms to prevent future conflicts. You listen to speeches filled with lofty ideals about lasting peace, collective security, and the League of Nations. Yet beneath the surface there is anger, bitterness, and a desire for retribution. Germany is forced to accept full responsibility for the war. Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause, a stipulation that weighs heavily on the German people. You sense the humiliation in their voices, the resentment brewing among soldiers, civilians and politicians alike. The treaty demands massive reparations, territorial losses and military restrictions that many Germans view as unjust and crippling. New nations emerge from the ruins of empires, but their borders are often drawn with little regard for ethnic or cultural realities, sowing discord and instability. The German territories of Alsace-Lorraine are returned to France, and the Saar Basin placed under League control. The Rhineland is demilitarised, a buffer zone meant to protect France but a source of humiliation for Germany. In the east, Poland is restored but finds itself in conflict with its neighbours over disputed lands. The treaty also enshrines the independence of Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia and the Baltic states, each navigating the difficult transition from empire to nationhood. The League of Nations, a new international body created to maintain peace, is a hopeful experiment but lacks the authority and participation, especially from the United States, to enforce its will effectively. The idealism of collective security clashes with the harsh realities of national interests and grievances. As you observe these negotiations and their outcomes, it becomes clear that while the treaty ends one war, it also sets the stage for future turmoil. The old world may have been destroyed, but the new order is fragile, precarious and burdened by unresolved wounds. The story of June 28, 1914 echoes in every decision made here, a reminder that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not just a moment of violence, but the spark that ignited a powder keg of history. In the years following the armistice, you find yourself wandering through towns and villages across Europe, where the quiet echoes of the war's devastation linger in the air like a persistent fog. The landscape is marked by shattered homes, scarred battlefields now slowly reclaimed by nature, and communities grappling with the profound loss and upheaval wrought by years of relentless conflict. The war has changed everything, not only borders and governments, but the very fabric of society itself. You walk along the cobblestone streets of a small French town, once vibrant and lively, now subdued and reflective. The war claimed the lives of a significant portion of the male population, the lost generation, as they are often called, leaving behind widows, orphans, and a deep societal wound that no peace treaty can fully heal. The absence of so many young men creates a void that shapes family dynamics, labour forces, and even cultural expressions. Poetry and art reflect the haunting memories of trenches, gas attacks, and the endless mud, offering a voice to those who survived and mourned. Economic hardship blankets much of the continent. Factories, once booming with wartime production, now struggle to shift to peacetime needs. Inflation and unemployment rise, while veterans return to societies that cannot always absorb them or understand the trauma they carry. In Britain, France, Germany and Italy, public health is strained. Hospitals overflow with wounded soldiers, many bearing physical and psychological scars that will endure a lifetime. Women, who had stepped into roles traditionally held by men during the war, face a complicated transition. In some places, the war opens doors for greater participation in public life, and suffrage movements gain momentum, yet traditional gender roles also assert themselves with the return of peace. The societal shifts are uneven and fraught with tension, reflecting a world struggling to find equilibrium after unprecedented upheaval. Across Europe, the political landscape is equally unsettled. Radical ideologies, communism, fascism, nationalism, find fertile ground among populations disillusioned by the promises and betrayals of the war's aftermath. Democracies are fragile and new, often challenged by extremists on both left and right. The ideals that motivated some to fight, such as liberty and justice, seem distant amid economic despair and social unrest. The psychological toll of the war, the sense of disillusionment, and the profound questioning of previously accepted values permeate the cultural milieu. Writers, artists, and philosophers grapple with the meaning of a conflict so devastating it defies comprehension. This collective trauma shapes the spirit of an era, casting long shadows over the decades to come. As you stand quietly among these communities, you feel the weight of history pressing down, yet also the stubborn resilience of human beings striving to rebuild, remember, and find hope in a changed world. The old world has been destroyed, and the new one is still taking shape, uncertain, fragile, and filled with both promise and peril. As you move through the streets of the newly formed nations and borders, the excitement of newfound independence is tinged with the undercurrent of anxiety and unresolved conflict. The map of Europe, painstakingly redrawn in treaties and negotiations, tells a story of compromise and contention, with lines often drawn by diplomats far removed from the realities on the ground. You sense that beneath the surface of official proclamations and celebrations, old grievances simmer and new disputes begin to fester. In the borderlands between Poland and Germany, communities are divided, some finding themselves suddenly part of a new state, others yearning to return to a former homeland. Ethnic Germans living in Polish territory face suspicion and hostility, while Poles in German lands grapple with discrimination. These tensions are not isolated but part of a broader pattern, repeated across Central and Eastern Europe, where diverse populations are forced to navigate the complexities of nationalism and minority rights. You visit the Balkans, where the kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes struggles to forge unity among its diverse peoples. The legacy of centuries-old religious, cultural and political differences challenges the ideal of a cohesive nation. Political factions vie for power, and distrust between groups occasionally erupts into violence. The fragile statehood of Yugoslavia embodies the difficulties of balancing competing identities in a post-imperial world. Meanwhile, in the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, ethnic Germans feel marginalised and discontented, laying groundwork for future unrest. These communities look with envy and bitterness towards Germany, which, despite defeat and humiliation, remains a potent symbol of national pride and unity for many. The Treaty of Versailles and its counterparts in the East aim to create lasting peace by satisfying the demands of self-determination, but the reality is far messier. Borders drawn without deep consideration of ethnic and cultural complexities sow seeds of future conflict. Many minority populations find themselves second-class citizens, breeding resentment and political radicalisation. Amid this atmosphere, extremist movements gain footholds, capitalising on discontent and promising restoration or revenge. Fascist, communist, and nationalist ideologies begin to attract followers, each claiming to offer solutions to the chaos and instability of the post-war order. Walking through these lands, you feel the heavy weight of history's unfinished business. The promises of a peaceful new world are fragile, and the echoes of 1914 still resonate in the tensions that shape this uncertain era. The war that began on that fateful day in June 1914 did not just reshape Europe. It sent tremors across the entire globe, altering the course of international relations and the lives of millions far beyond the old continent. As you trace the ripples of its impact, you find yourself travelling beyond Europe, to places where the consequences of the conflict are still unfolding in quiet but profound ways. In the Middle East, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire leaves a vacuum that Western powers rush to fill. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, secretly drawn during the war, carves up the region between British and French spheres of influence, disregarding the aspirations of local peoples. The promises made to Arab leaders who had supported the British against the Ottomans with hopes of independence feel betrayed. The mandate system established by the League of Nations turns former Ottoman provinces into territories administered by foreign powers, sowing seeds of resentment and future conflict. You visit Jerusalem and Baghdad, cities ancient yet caught in the swirl of modern geopolitics. The imposition of new borders and governance disrupts centuries-old communities, igniting tensions that will echo through the decades. The rise of nationalist movements in these lands is a direct legacy of the war and the empire's fall, as people seek to assert their identity and sovereignty in the face of foreign domination. Across the Atlantic, the United States emerges from the war with its economy booming and its international influence growing. Though President Wilson's idealism shapes the post-war peace efforts, the nation ultimately retreats into isolationism, wary of entanglements in Europe's future conflicts. Yet America's role in shaping the New World Order is undeniable, and its cultural and political power expands rapidly. In Asia, Japan capitalizes on the weakening of European powers to assert greater influence, expanding its territorial holdings and ambitions. The war accelerates shifts in global power dynamics, setting the stage for future struggles that will engulf the world in new ways. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the trauma and disillusionment of the war influence art, literature, philosophy, and popular culture. The brutal reality of mechanized warfare challenges traditional notions of heroism and progress. Writers like Erich Maria Remarque and poets like Wilfred Owen capture the despair and futility felt by many. The lost generation grapples with the meaning of their sacrifice amid widespread skepticism of authority and nationalism. The Great War leaves a legacy that is both a warning and a lesson, a world forever changed by a single act of violence and the chain of events it unleashed. As you absorb this global panorama, you sense the fragility of peace and the complex web of human ambition, fear, and resilience that continues to shape history. You find yourself in a quiet European cafe, the soft murmur of conversations weaving with the clink of cups and the scent of coffee and tobacco. It is the 1920s, a decade of both vibrant creativity and lingering sorrow, where the scars of the Great War are etched deeply into the collective soul. Though the guns have fallen silent, the psychological aftermath reverberates in the lives of millions, shaping culture, art, and the very ways people understand themselves and their world. The war's unprecedented scale of death and destruction shattered illusions of progress and human perfectibility. It confronted Europe with mechanized slaughter, trench warfare, and a scale of suffering previously unimaginable. Survivors, physically wounded and mentally scarred, return to cities where the optimism of a new century is tempered by grief and loss. You see them in the streets, their faces marked by exhaustion and haunted memories, often unable to articulate the depths of their trauma. This emotional landscape gives rise to new forms of expression. Writers like Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, and Franz Kafka explore themes of fragmentation, alienation, and disillusionment. The art world is transformed by movements such as Dadaism and Surrealism, which reject traditional forms and embrace the absurdity and chaos felt after the war. Painters like Otto Dix depict grotesque images of the battlefield's horrors, forcing society to confront the brutal realities often hidden by official narratives. You also sense a growing skepticism toward institutions that had led millions to slaughter: governments, militaries, and religious authorities. Political radicalism finds fertile ground in this disillusionment, with some turning to communism, fascism, or anarchism, seeking answers in ideologies that promise renewal or revenge. Yet many others retreat inward, searching for meaning in personal experience, spirituality, or escapism. The psychological term shell shock enters the public consciousness, revealing the deep mental wounds inflicted by modern warfare. Treatment is Hello guys, tonight we're going to travel to a quieter, slower world, a world of train whistles in the distance, the rattle of porcelain teacups in Viennese cafes, dusty sunlight falling across maps of distant provinces, and diplomats adjusting their monocles beneath gaslight. It is a world balanced delicately on the edge of change, oblivious to the great tear that fate will slice through it in one warm summer day. Before we begin, I'm always curious to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it by you? Let me know in the comments below. It helps me imagine you more clearly wherever you are. Now, take a deep breath, sink into your pillow, let your blankets wrap around you like the wool coats worn by travellers in old railway compartments. Adjust your body until you feel just right. Let your jaw loosen. Rest your shoulders. Allow yourself to drift gently into this slow, faraway place. We're not in a rush here. We're going to drift into 1914, and here is part 1 of how one day in 1914 destroyed the old world forever. Part 1. The calm before the storm. Vienna, early morning, June 27th, 1914. You wake to the sound of hooves on cobblestone, muffled and rhythmic. A milk cart turns the corner below your shuttered window, creaking under the soft weight of glass bottles. The morning air drifts in with the scent of warm bread from the bakery downstairs, mingling with the faint tang of coal smoke still lingering from the night. The world feels still, not silent, but resting, as if history itself is holding its breath. You sit up in bed in your little pension room in the heart of Vienna. The wallpaper is beginning to peel near the ceiling, olive and gold stripes, very traditional, slightly faded. On the desk, yesterday's Neue Freie Presse lies folded. It says something about the Archduke and his visit to Bosnia, but you didn't read closely. Just another royal engagement, you thought. There's an uneventful comfort to your life. The post arrives every second morning, the baker's boy whistles the same melody when he passes the square, and the same bearded man feeds the pigeons outside the Hofburg Palace. Your work, perhaps you're a junior clerk or maybe an artist's apprentice, is ordinary, and though money is tight, you find peace in your routines. A coffee at Café Greensteidl, perhaps, where the intellectuals mutter about Hegel and Freud under clouds of cigarette smoke. A slow stroll past the Ringstrasse in the golden light of late afternoon. There's a sense that life will go on like this, always. Ordered, secure, European. The empire is ancient, sprawling. Over 50 million people live beneath the eagle's wings of the Austro-Hungarian realm, from Bohemia's forests to the plains of Hungary, from Dalmatian coasts to the snowy Carpathians. And yet, somehow, they all orbit Vienna. Here, at the centre, power and tradition whisper through the halls of marble ministries and opera houses. But beneath this calm surface, tiny cracks run through the foundations. You can't see them yet, not unless you know where to look. You don't see the anger in the Serbian cafes where young men speak in hushed tones of resistance. You don't see the telegrams passed between generals and diplomats, their language polite but brittle. You don't see the old system of empires and courts, of treaties and lineages, beginning to tremble beneath the weight of its own contradictions. But there is one man,